"Who told you to play that song?" The question cut through the little church before the last note even faded. Elijah Brooks froze on the piano bench, one hand still hovering above the cracked ivory keys, while his 8-year-old daughter Lily stood beside him with a yellowed sheet of music trembling on the stand. In the front row, Eleanor Whitmore had risen so quickly her embroidered handkerchief lay on the wooden floor. Marcus Hale stepped toward the piano with a careful smile that did not reach his eyes. "That paper should not be out here," he said. Lily looked up at her father and whispered, "Daddy, I only put it where music goes." 3 hours earlier, the same church smelled of lemon polish, old hymnals, and coffee burning too long in the fellowship hall. Sunlight came through the stained glass windows in broken colors, falling across folding chairs, donation baskets, and a banner that read "Save Our Church Fundraiser" in blue marker. The piano sat near the choir steps like something left behind after a storm. Its walnut finish was scratched pale at the corners. One leg had a split running down the side. 2 keys leaned lower than the rest, as if tired of being pressed by hands that no longer came. Elijah entered through the side door carrying a dented toolbox in one hand and Lily's small backpack in the other. He wore a dark flannel shirt dusted at the cuffs with sawdust, faded jeans, and the brown leather belt that held his tape measure and carpenter's pencil. He had already worked half a day repairing cabinets across town, but when Pastor Samuel called and said the church could not afford a piano technician, Elijah came anyway. Lily walked close to him, quiet but alert, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. Marcus Hale was standing near the piano with Grant Bell, the real estate sponsor whose silver watch flashed every time he moved his wrist. Marcus held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. His voice was calm, public, and polished. "Pastor, we appreciate Mr. Brooks's willingness, but good intentions and duct tape will not save a condemned instrument." A few people near the coffee table smiled into their paper cups. Elijah heard them. Lily heard them too. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. Elijah did not look up right away. He knelt beside the piano and ran his thumb along the cracked leg, feeling the grain beneath the varnish. The wood told him more than the room did. "It's not condemned," he said quietly. "It's neglected." Marcus let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. "We already had it assessed." He lifted a folded estimate from his clipboard. "The repair cost is far beyond what this church can justify. It would be more responsible to remove it before tonight's guests arrive." Pastor Samuel, thin and gray-haired, shifted beside the altar rail. His hands shook when he reached into his jacket and took out a small envelope. "Elijah, I can at least give you something for coming." Elijah stood and pushed the envelope gently back toward him. "Use it for the fundraiser, Pastor. Let me look at her first." The word "her" made the room go quiet for half a second. Not silent, just paused, like the piano had been insulted in a language only Elijah understood. He opened his toolbox, took out a cloth, and wiped dust from the keys before touching anything deeper. Lily sat on the front pew with a little tin lid in her lap, ready to hold screws the way her father had taught her. Elijah removed the front panel carefully. A smell of old wood and dry felt rose into the air. Then he noticed it. Behind the lower frame, near the left side, a narrow seam where the glue was darker than the rest, too straight to be a natural crack. He did not pry it open. He only marked the spot with the tip of his carpenter's pencil. Marcus's shoes appeared beside him almost immediately. "That area has nothing to do with the sound," Marcus said softly. Elijah looked at the seam, then at the estimate in Marcus's hand, and saw a tiny smear of fresh walnut dust on the manila folder tucked beneath the clipboard. The fresh walnut dust sat on the edge of Marcus Hale's manila folder like something too small to accuse anyone and too strange to ignore. Elijah saw it, then looked back at the narrow seam inside the piano, but he said nothing. Marcus adjusted the clipboard against his chest and smiled toward Pastor Samuel, as if the moment had already been handled. "For everyone's safety, I think we should limit how much unauthorized work is done here." Grant Bell gave a sympathetic nod. "Nobody is questioning the man's heart." Marcus added, "Only the liability." The words landed softly, but Lily heard them like a door closing. She looked down at her father's boots, the scuffed leather, the sawdust caught in the laces, the small tear near one toe he had patched with glue instead of buying new ones. Elijah only reached into his toolbox, took out his phone, and photographed the seam before his hands touched another screw. "That way nobody has to guess what was already here," he said. A woman near the refreshment table whispered that he sounded like he had been blamed before. Another man murmured that a carpenter was not a piano technician. The old church lights hummed overhead, bright enough to show every scratch on the piano, every wrinkle in Pastor Samuel's tired face, every polite expression people wore when they wanted to feel kind while looking down on someone. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to seem private while still letting the front row hear. "Mr. Brooks, I respect working people. I do. My father worked with his hands." He paused, letting that borrowed humility soften the room. "But this instrument is tied to church property, insurance records, and tonight's donor presentation. If something breaks after you open it, the board needs to know who accepted responsibility." Elijah closed the small panel halfway and glanced at Lily, who had stopped moving the screws in her tin lid. He wiped his thumb on his flannel cuff before answering. "Then write down what I touch." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" "Write it down," Elijah said. "Every screw, every panel, every part one move. I'll sign it." The room got quiet again, but not with respect yet. More like surprise that a man they had already placed beneath them knew how to protect the truth without raising his voice. Grant looked at the estimate in Marcus's hand, then at the piano, then at Elijah's phone. For 1 second, his polished smile thinned. Marcus recovered first. "That won't be necessary." "It is if you plan to blame him," Lily said, small and clear from the pew. Pastor Samuel turned sharply, not angry, just worried. "Lily." Elijah held up one hand gently without looking away from Marcus. "She's 8. She doesn't know how adults dress up unfair things yet." Nobody laughed. The coffee urn clicked in the fellowship hall, loud in the pause. Marcus's cheeks tightened, but his voice stayed smooth. "This is exactly why we need order. Children hear pieces of conversations and misunderstand them." He reached toward the exposed panel, but Elijah moved a cloth beneath his hand before Marcus could touch the piano. It was not aggressive. It was careful, protective. "Let me keep the fingerprints clean," Elijah said. That was the moment the woman in the black coat appeared again at the side aisle. Eleanor Whitmore had entered without announcement, her silver hair tucked beneath a dark hat, a pair of cream gloves folded in one hand. She did not know Elijah. She did not know Lily. She only saw Marcus's hand suspended above the open piano, Elijah's cloth between him and the wood, and the manila folder with that faint smear of walnut dust along its edge. Marcus turned quickly, warmth flooding his face like a switch had been pulled. "Mrs. Whitmore, we weren't expecting you this early." Eleanor's eyes stayed on the folder a beat too long. "Clearly," she said. Marcus laughed softly, but his fingers curled around the folder until the dust disappeared beneath his thumb. Elijah lowered his eyes back to the piano, and in the dim space behind the panel, just beyond the seam he had marked, he noticed something else. One screw head was newer than all the others, clean silver in a row of old brass, as if somebody had opened that hidden place long before he ever walked into the church. The newer screw sat in the old brass row like a lie wearing clean shoes. Elijah studied it for only a second, then turned his phone sideways and took one quiet picture before anyone could call his concern imagination. He did not accuse Marcus. He did not look toward Eleanor for approval. He simply set the phone face down on the piano bench, took a smaller screwdriver from his toolbox, and said, "If this has been opened before, I'm going to open it slower." Lily slid down from the pew and carried the tin lid closer with both hands, careful not to spill the screws. "Daddy, is it broken bad?" she whispered. Elijah softened at the sound of worry in her voice. "No, baby, just tired." His thumb brushed one of the cracked keys, and for a moment his face changed in a way only Lily would have noticed. Her mother had played a cheap keyboard in their apartment years ago, before illness made her hands too weak for music. Elijah had kept that keyboard long after it stopped working. Not because it was worth money, but because Lily used to fall asleep to those soft, uneven chords. Maybe that was why he could not stand seeing old instruments thrown away like they had never comforted anybody. He laid a clean cloth over the exposed frame before removing the panel, then placed each screw in Lily's tin lid by size, oldest to newest, brass to silver. Marcus watched from a few feet away, arms folded, his smile returning now that Eleanor was in the room. "Mr. Brooks is being very thorough," he said, the words polished smooth enough to sound like praise. Grant Bell checked his watch. "We do have guests coming soon." Elijah nodded once. "Then I'll work clean." He reached into his toolbox and pulled out 2 pieces of walnut scrap wrapped in paper, leftovers from a cabinet repair he had done for a widow who paid him in installments and peach preserves. He shaped one edge with a hand file, slow strokes that made a soft rasping sound under the hum of the church lights. Lily held the tin lid steady on the bench, her small knees pressed together, her eyes moving between her father's hands and Marcus's folder. Eleanor remained near the side aisle, her gloves folded so tightly the fabric creased. She did not step forward. She had spent years learning not to trust every sincere face in a church building. Still, when Elijah refused Pastor Samuel's envelope again and slid it back toward the old man without drama, her eyes narrowed a little, not with suspicion, but with confusion. "Use it for the heating bill," Elijah said. "This place is cold enough in March." Pastor Samuel's mouth trembled. "You have your own child to care for." Elijah glanced at Lily, then pressed the walnut brace into place beneath the piano frame. "That's why I want her to see me fix what I can." Marcus gave a gentle laugh, almost fatherly. "That is admirable, but sentiment will not solve structural problems." As he spoke, he tapped his folder against his thigh, and a tiny shaving of walnut fell to the floor. Elijah saw it. Eleanor saw Elijah see it. Neither of them spoke. Instead, Elijah picked up the shaving with the corner of his cloth and set it beside the clean silver screw on the piano bench. It looked like nothing. 1 curl of wood, 1 screw, 1 pencil mark inside an old instrument. But for the first time, Eleanor Whitmore took 1 careful step closer to the piano, as if she had realized that this poor carpenter was not just repairing wood. He was preserving the first small proof that someone had touched the truth before him. The tiny walnut shaving on the bench changed the temperature of the room, though nobody said so. Marcus noticed Eleanor looking at it, and his pleasant expression tightened for half a breath before he stepped forward with the clipboard hugged to his chest. "I think we're drifting from the purpose of the morning," he said, gentle enough for church walls. "Mr. Brooks came to help, and we appreciate that. But loose hardware and old scraps can make anything look mysterious." Elijah did not answer. He only folded the cloth around the shaving, placed the clean silver screw beside it, and turned his phone screen toward Pastor Samuel so the old man could see the picture he had taken before the panel came off. The photo showed the seam, the darker glue, and that same silver screw still set in place before Elijah touched it. Pastor Samuel leaned closer, his glasses sliding down his nose. Eleanor stayed near the aisle, not yet convinced, not yet ready to defend anyone. Her eyes moved from Elijah's worn hands to Marcus's folder, then back to the piano. Marcus gave a small laugh. "Pictures can be misleading, especially when people don't know what they're looking at." Elijah looked up then, calm as a man measuring wood before a cut. "Then let's keep everything where we found it." That simple sentence slowed the room. Grant Bell shifted beside the donation table, his silver watch clicking against a stack of pledge cards. Marcus reached toward the bench. "I'll secure those pieces in the office." "No, sir," Elijah said softly. Not loud, not sharp, just enough. Lily's shoulders lifted, as if she expected someone to scold him. Elijah placed his hand over the cloth, not hiding it, only protecting it. "Pastor Samuel should hold them. It's church property." The old pastor nodded, though his hand trembled when he reached for the cloth. That was when Lily, sitting small and straight beside the toolbox, pointed at the exposed wooden seam. "Daddy, there's paper in there." Everyone looked. The edge was barely visible, A dull cream line caught behind the darker strip of glue. Elijah crouched, careful not to touch it with his fingers. He took a pair of narrow tweezers from his toolbox, the kind he used for splinters and tiny wood inlays, and eased the paper free inch by inch. The church seemed to hold its breath. What came out was not a receipt, not a label, not trash. It was a yellowed sheet of music, folded twice, its edges soft from age. The bottom corner was torn away. Across the top, in faded ink, were 2 letters, E.W. Beneath the notes, almost swallowed by time, a sentence leaned across the staff lines. For the church when the last note is found. Eleanor's face changed before she could stop it. Not belief. Not yet. Something more fragile. Recognition trying to survive caution. Marcus moved too quickly. That is exactly the kind of old paper that attracts mold, he said, reaching for it. I'll dispose of it properly, Lily whispered. But it was already torn. Her voice was small, but it landed. Elijah did not snatch the paper back. He slid it onto the clean white cloth and lifted it toward the stained glass window, where blue and gold light passed through the thin page. The torn corner showed fresh fibers along one side, brighter than the rest, as if the tear was not as old as the music. Marcus's smile remained, but one word slipped out too fast. Arthur kept all sorts of sentimental things. Eleanor turned her head slowly. Arthur. The room stilled around the name. Marcus blinked, then corrected himself. Mrs. Whitmore's late husband. Everyone knows his history with local charities. But not everyone did. Elijah certainly had not. Lily had not. And Pastor Samuel's mouth had gone slightly open, because the name on the sheet was not Arthur at all. Only E.W. Elijah lowered the page back onto the cloth, and his eyes moved from the torn corner to the walnut dust hidden under Marcus's thumb. For the first time, he understood that the paper was not just old music. It was the first piece of a message someone had tried to interrupt. The name Arthur hung in the air longer than Marcus meant it to. Eleanor Whitmore did not move toward the sheet music. She did not reach for Elijah's phone or demand answers. She only folded her cream gloves once, then again, until the leather made a faint dry sound between her fingers. Play it, she said. Marcus turned at once. Mrs. Whitmore, I don't think that's wise. The instrument is unstable, and we're already behind schedule. Grant Bell added, gently. No one wants this morning to become uncomfortable. Elijah looked at Pastor Samuel first, not Eleanor, because the piano belonged to the church. The old pastor gave a small nod. Elijah sat on the bench, but not like a performer. He sat like a man about to test a repaired stair before letting a child step on it. He checked the brace under the frame, pressed one low key, listened to the vibration, then adjusted a felt damper with the careful edge of his thumbnail. The church had been full of little noises until then. Paper cups bending in hands, folding chairs scraping, whispered opinions moving through the room like insects. One by one, those noises thinned. Lily stood near the bench, no longer frightened, because her father's hands looked the way they always did when fixing something broken at home. Patient, steady, refusing to rush just because someone powerful was watching. Elijah placed the yellowed music on the stand without smoothing the torn edge. Only the first 4 measures, he said. The rest isn't complete. Marcus gave a soft, professional sigh. This is exactly how confusion starts. Elijah did not answer him. He touched the keys. The first note came out wounded but alive, a little flat at the bottom. The sound of old wood remembering its shape. The second note steadied. By the 4th measure, the sanctuary changed. Eleanor's hand lowered slowly onto the back of the pew in front of her. Her eyes were fixed not on Elijah, but on the notes themselves, as if the paper had opened a door she had nailed shut years ago. At the side table, Grant stopped turning his watch. Pastor Samuel's lips parted. Even Marcus stopped breathing loudly. Elijah lifted his hands before the phrase could pretend to be a song. That's as far as the paper gives me. Eleanor's voice came thin. Where did you learn that? I didn't, Elijah said. It was inside the piano. Marcus stepped in with a calmness that felt practiced. And that is why we should secure it privately before people misunderstand what they heard. Eleanor looked at him then, really looked. I asked him. Marcus lowered his eyes for half a second. Of course. The air conditioner clicked on above the choir loft, suddenly loud in the pause. Elijah removed the sheet music from the stand and slid it back onto the cloth, careful not to touch the ink. Then he pointed, not dramatically, only precisely, to the staff line where the melody stopped. This tear cuts through the last measure. Whoever tore it didn't tear from the edge inward. They tore from this point out. Pastor Samuel leaned closer. How can you tell? Elijah picked up one of the older brass screws and set it beside the torn corner without touching the page. Old paper phrase soft. Fresh damage leaves teeth. Lily whispered, relieved to understand something. Like when my homework rips wrong. Elijah nodded once. Like that. Eleanor did not smile, but something in her face loosened. She took out her phone and sent a text with hands that no longer looked steady. Bring me the church donation records from 12 years ago, she said quietly to whoever was on the other end. And do not let anyone shred or move old files. Marcus's polished mask held, but barely. Mrs. Whitmore, those records are administrative. I can have them summarized for you. No. Eleanor said. Originals. That one word quieted even Grant Bell. Elijah stood from the bench and gently closed the fallboard halfway, not shutting the piano, only protecting the keys. He did not accuse Marcus. He did not comfort Eleanor with promises he could not prove. He only looked back at the hidden seam, the silver screw, the walnut shaving, and the torn music now resting under stained glass light. The first proof had not revealed the whole truth, but it had proved one thing. Somebody had opened the piano, touched the song, and removed the part that mattered most. The missing last measure sat between them like a locked door. Elijah could have pointed at Marcus then, could have let the room turn its suspicion into a weapon. But he only wrapped the torn sheet music in the clean cloth and handed it to Pastor Samuel. Truth needs a table, not a crowd, he said. So they moved to the church office behind the sanctuary, where the air smelled of paper dust, old coffee, and the faint wax of communion candles stored in boxes under the window. Eleanor stood near the filing cabinet while Pastor Samuel pulled down a cardboard archive box tied with faded blue ribbon. His hands shook so badly Elijah stepped forward without being asked and lifted the box onto the desk for him. Marcus followed, still smiling, but the corners of that smile had started to lose their shape. Grant Bell stayed near the doorway, phone in hand, watching the hallway more than the room. Pastor Samuel opened the box, and inside were donation records, service logs, repair receipts, yellow envelopes, and church bulletins from years when the carpet had been a different color and the choir still wore green robes. Eleanor reached for nothing until Pastor Samuel gave permission. She was not acting like a donor anymore. She was acting like a woman afraid to touch the past too hard. Then Pastor Samuel found the receipt. It was folded into a Christmas program from 12 years ago. The ink had faded, but the name was clear enough. Arthur Whitmore. Below it, in a neat handwritten line, were the words, Piano frame repair and preservation donation. Do not replace this piano. Eleanor sat down without meaning to. The chair legs scraped against the floor, and the sound made Lily flinch in the hallway. Elijah looked toward his daughter through the half-open door. She was sitting on a bench with her backpack in her lap, swinging one foot slowly, doing exactly what he had told her. Staying where he could see her. Eleanor touched the receipt with 2 fingers. He never told me this. Her voice was not angry yet. It was worse than angry. It was hollow. Marcus cleared his throat softly. Arthur helped many places. He was generous that way. Elijah looked at the receipt, then at the photo on his phone of the hidden seam. Pastor, do you have service logs from after Mr. Whitmore passed? Pastor Samuel nodded and searched deeper in the box. Marcus stepped closer. I'm not sure we need to turn this into an audit. Nobody said audit, Elijah replied. Just dates. That stopped Marcus for half a second. The old pastor found the logbook. A page near the middle had been cut out so carefully the remaining edge looked like a white scar. The entries before it listed choir practice, furnace inspection, roof leak. The entries after it jumped 8 months forward. Elijah did not touch the missing page. He only laid his phone beside the book, aligning the photo of the silver screw with the cut edge in the service log. The room fell into a deeper quiet. Then Lily's voice came from the hallway, small but certain. "Daddy, that red light is on." Everyone turned. Above the office door, the old hallway security camera had a tiny red light blinking like a tired heartbeat. Marcus looked at it too quickly. "Those cameras don't store anything useful," he said. "They were never upgraded." But Eleanor was already taking out her phone again. This time her hand did not shake. "I want the footage preserved," she said. Marcus smiled, but sweat had gathered above his upper lip. "Mrs. Whitmore, I can have someone review it privately." Elijah closed the logbook with care and slid it toward Pastor Samuel, not Eleanor, not Marcus. "No," he said quietly. "If pages are missing and cameras are blinking, this can't be handled in somebody's private office anymore." At that moment, Grant Bell's phone lit up in his hand, and on the screen, before he turned it away, Elijah saw the subject line of an email already sent that morning. Final land transfer timeline. The sanctuary had been rearranged for the fundraiser, but now it felt less like a place asking for help and more like a room waiting for judgment. Folding chairs faced the piano in 3 tight rows. The donation table had been pushed against the wall. The banner that read "Save Our Church Fundraiser" hung slightly crooked behind Marcus Hale, who stood near the choir steps with his clipboard pressed flat against his suit. Elijah entered from the side hallway with Lily close to his left hand, Pastor Samuel carrying the cloth-wrapped sheet music, and Eleanor Whitmore walking behind them in silence. Nobody clapped. Nobody welcomed them. People only turned and watched the poor carpenter come back to the same piano he had been warned not to touch. Marcus lifted one hand, gentle and official. "Friends, before rumors get ahead of facts, let me explain." Mr. Brooks found an old paper inside a damaged instrument. Mrs. Whitmore, understandably, is emotional because of her late husband's charitable history. But emotion should not stop a necessary vote. Grant Bell stepped beside him, wearing concern like a polished coat. The development plan would preserve the church's legacy in a modern way. A few heads nodded. For one moment, the room leaned back toward Marcus. He sounded calm. He sounded reasonable. He sounded like the adult in charge. Elijah did not interrupt. He placed his toolbox beside the piano bench, took Lily's backpack from her shoulder, and set it safely on the front pew. Then he looked at Pastor Samuel. "May I put the pieces on the table?" Pastor Samuel nodded. The old man's voice was thin but steady. One at a time, Elijah unfolded the cloth. First came the yellowed sheet music, the one Lily had placed on the stand, with EW at the top and the torn last measure missing. A murmur moved through the church. Marcus smiled sadly. A touching keepsake, but not a legal document. Elijah nodded once, accepting the limit instead of fighting it. "Correct." That single word made Eleanor glance at him. He was not trying to win with drama. He was making the truth carry its own weight. Next, Pastor Samuel set down the old repair receipt. Arthur Whitmore's name, the preservation donation, the line that said, "Do not replace this piano." Marcus folded his hands. Again, Arthur supported many causes. That doesn't mean he intended to stop responsible stewardship. The room shifted again. It was a good answer. Too good. Grant Bell almost smiled. Then Elijah took out his phone and turned the screen toward the front row. "This was before I removed the panel." The photo showed the hidden seam, the dark glue, and the clean silver screw among old brass screws. "This is after." The second photo showed the screw on the bench beside the walnut shaving. Marcus's jaw tightened. Old buildings get touched by many hands. "Yes," Elijah said quietly. "That's why dates matter." Eleanor placed her phone on the table. A paused security clip filled the screen. The image was grainy, angled from the hallway, but clear enough. Marcus entering the piano room the night before with a manila folder under his arm. Marcus gave a soft laugh, almost wounded. "I went in there to pray. This church has been under great stress." Lily stood partly behind her father's leg, then raised one small finger toward the screen. But he came out holding it different. The room looked again. On the video, Marcus entered with the folder flat. He left with it bent at the middle, pressed tight under his jacket. Elijah put a hand gently on Lily's shoulder, not to silence her, but to steady her. "That's all she saw," he said. "Let the rest be proven by records." Eleanor's eyes did not leave Marcus. "Then we will use records." She opened another image. The email subject Elijah had glimpsed on Grant's phone. Final land transfer timeline, timestamped before the board had ever voted. Grant's expression hardened for the first time. Marcus lifted his clipboard. "This is becoming unfair. We are embarrassing good people over misunderstandings." Elijah looked at him, tired, calm, and immovable. "No, sir. We're stopping one more thing from being buried." The sanctuary went still. Then Eleanor reached into her handbag and took out a sealed request. Notice from her estate office. "I have asked Arthur's attorney, Gerald Price, to come here with the original will file." Marcus's hand slipped on the clipboard. At the back of the church, the glass doors opened, and a gray-haired man in a navy suit stepped inside carrying a black legal case that had not yet been unlocked. Gerald Price set the black legal case on the communion table, and the little brass locks clicked open loud enough for the back row to hear. "The original will contains no instruction preventing a responsible sale," he said, lifting a cream folder with Arthur Whitmore's name stamped across the tab. Eleanor did not blink. "Then read the sealed addendum." Gerald's hand stopped. For the first time, Marcus Hale looked at the floor. "There is no sealed addendum," Gerald said, but his voice had gone dry. Elijah stood beside the piano, not near the table, not near the men with folders and titles. He looked at the torn sheet music, then at the frame he had opened with Lily holding the screws. Something about the missing last measure kept pulling at him. He crouched beside the piano again, reached behind the strip of old felt where the paper had been hidden, and eased out a smaller piece wedged so deep it looked like dust-dark cardboard. It was the torn corner. For notes. One line of writing. "Open the sealed addendum if this song is ever played here again." Nobody moved. The air conditioner hummed above the choir loft like a distant machine in an empty hospital room. Eleanor slowly took the fragment, matched it against the torn sheet, and the fibers joined like a wound closing. "Play it," she whispered. Elijah looked at Pastor Samuel. The old man nodded through tears. Elijah sat down and placed the completed music on the stand. Lily slipped her hand into his coat sleeve and then stepped back to safety, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Elijah played slowly, not like a concert, not like a man trying to impress anyone, but like someone carrying a glass bowl across a dark room. The wounded first notes steadied. The 4 missing notes completed the phrase. Eleanor covered her mouth with both hands. "Arthur," she breathed. That was when Gerald Price's pen slipped from his fingers and struck the wood floor. Marcus flinched at the sound. Eleanor turned toward Gerald, and this time she did not speak as a grieving widow. She spoke as the legal trustee Arthur had named. "Open it." Gerald stared at the legal case, then at the camera still paused on Marcus entering the piano room, then at the receipt signed 12 years ago. Slowly, he removed a thinner sealed envelope from beneath the folder lining. The wax seal was cracked at one edge. Inside was Arthur's signed addendum, witnessed and notarized. A preservation fund for the church, a prohibition against selling the land without a full public vote, and Eleanor Whitmore as final oversight trustee. Grant Bell stopped breathing through his smile. Marcus's clipboard slid from his hand and hit the carpet without a sound. The sanctuary went completely still. No one whispered. No chair skrapt. Even the old lights seemed to hold their buzz. Eleanor lifted the addendum for the room to see. "My husband did not leave money for a building," she said, voice breaking but steady. "He left protection for a people." Elijah lowered his hands from the keys. He did not smile at Marcus. He did not look for applause. He only reached back and found Lily's small hand. The truth had finally become too documented to dismiss and too sacred to bury. But as every face turned toward him with the kind of respect he had never asked for, Elijah looked down at the old piano and wondered what a man should do when the miracle he helped uncover suddenly made the whole room see him. The sanctuary did not erupt after Eleanor read the addendum. It emptied slowly, like people were afraid their shoes might make too much noise against a floor that had just heard the truth. Marcus Hale was asked by the board to surrender his keys before leaving, and Pastor Samuel wrote down every step in the church minutes with hands that no longer trembled. Gerald Price closed his legal case, but not before Eleanor's estate office received copies of the sealed addendum, the repair receipt, the camera stills, and the email timeline. Grant Bell left through the side door without shaking anyone's hand. No one chased them. No one shouted. The evidence had done what anger could not. Later, when the last donor chair was folded and the evening light poured gold across the choir steps, Eleanor stood beside the piano with the yellowed music resting safely inside a clear sleeve. The torn corner no longer looked like damage. It looked like a missing word finally returned to a sentence. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "my husband trusted this church before I understood why." Elijah was packing his toolbox, sliding the same worn screwdriver back into its place. "He left it better than he found it," he said. Eleanor looked at his hands, rough from work, careful even in exhaustion. "So did you." She offered to pay him properly, not as charity, not as rescue, but as a debt the church owed for labor, materials, and truth preserved. Elijah accepted only the cost of the walnut brace, the replacement felt, and the hours Pastor Samuel had already written into the record. When Eleanor asked what else he wanted, he looked toward Lily, who was sitting on the front pew with her legs tucked under her, no longer scared of the room. "Let kids come here on Saturdays," he said. "Not just to sing. To learn how to fix things before the world tells them broken means worthless." Eleanor's eyes filled, but she did not try to turn the moment into a performance. "Then the fund will protect that too." Weeks later, a small brass plaque was placed beside the piano. It did not praise donors first. It listed Arthur Whitmore's preservation gift, Pastor Samuel's witness, Lily Brooks's careful discovery, and Elijah Brooks's repair, documented before accusation could bury it. Lily traced her name once with one finger, then looked up at her father. "I didn't solve it, right?" Elijah knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "No, baby. You did something better. You told the truth and let grown folks do the grown part." She smiled then, safe enough to be a child again. Eleanor sat at the bench that afternoon and pressed the first note of Arthur's song. Her hand shook, but this time she did not pull away. Elijah stood near the back with his toolbox at his feet, the same toolbox some had mistaken for proof he did not belong. Now it looked like what it had always been. A man's quiet promise to repair what others were ready to discard. Nobody clapped when the song ended. They only sat together in a silence that no longer felt like shock, felt like respect. And in that small church, under warm light and old wood, dignity did not need to raise its voice. Kindness had simply waited long enough to become justice.